Good morning. Our reading this morning is found in the book of 1 Peter, chapter 1, verses 3 to 9. And it says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. By his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who are being protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, even if now for a little while you have had to suffer various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold that, though perishable, is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Although you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy. For you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Lord, may your word help feed our inner hunger and quench our thirsty souls. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Well, as I said at the start, we're in this season of resurrection. We're in the season of Easter, and we've had the resurrection. The thing I've learned over time is that you don't get resurrection without crucifixion. The faith becomes fairy floss if all we can talk about is resurrection. That in fact it's the crucifixion of Jesus that gives the resurrection its weight. The writer of Peter, the book of Peter, it was probably written in a Christian community. There's a fair bit of conjecture. It probably wasn't written by Peter himself, but it was written by a community of people who would have been writing within his spirit, within his school of thought, in his legacy, if you like, and probably written somewhere close to Rome, right under the nose of the empire. And Peter's audience would have known about suffering. They would have known about crucifixion. They would have actually witnessed crucifixions. And they knew crucifixion not as an instrument of God, which is how some Christians talk about it, as if God somehow ordains the cross. But they knew it as a tool of Rome. A tool of fear. A tool of control, of oppression. You ended up on the cross because you were a recalcitrant, because you refused to bow to Caesar as King and Lord. That's why people ended up on the cross. Peter's or the people who are writing within this community of faith that produces the book of 1 Peter for us, would have known many people who bore the scars of that kind of life. Maybe not actual crucifixions, because no one survived a crucifixion. But they would have known the scars in people's lives of living under fear and control and oppression. Of not really knowing what was coming next. They would have been bearing the scars of life. They would have known people for whom those scars of life, metaphorically, were deep and visible. Scars of life that is difficult. The scars of life that's a struggle. The scars of life from carrying burdens that no one will help give you relief from. The scars of life being joyless, being without hope, being an existence, but not a joy. The thing is, 2,000 years later, you and I know people like that too. My guess is it's why Corrimal Uniting is, as it is, quite a community-based church. Because at times in your past, you've looked around at lives around you and gone, there's people hurting here. There's pain, there's struggle, there's hardship, there's scars. There's kind of like a living crucifixion going on. People who don't fit in. People who can't fit in. People for whom it's just outside their grasp of what do I do to fit in. And in our past as a church, I'm presuming some of you in this room and people before you have looked at that and gone, we can make a difference, we can try and make a difference here. And we continue to try and do that today. You see, part of that comes from our reading today. It may not have been a reading that was read at the time when Living English was started up. It may not have been a reading that was read at the time at the opening of the op shop. It might not have been when Ensmeet Cafe got started that they pulled out 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 to 9. Or when Time Out got going, or the craft Saturday afternoons. But somewhere in the background of people's, I'm presuming of people's thought, was this hope of a living hope for resurrection in people's lives. The writer of Peter, it comes through in their writing. Paul, it turns up in Paul's writing every so often as well. This idea that resurrection is not just something that happens to Jesus. That resurrection can happen for us. And resurrection can happen for those around us. That's why it's referred to as a living hope. Not just a future hope, but a living hope. something that's attainable. Well, it's not something you actually get, but it's something you can live into now. The experience of resurrection in the here and now. It's that now and not yet experience of the faith. Many people can tell you about what's coming next and then turn to fear to help you make a decision to get there. But the writers of the New Testament didn't work it that way. They talked about resurrection that was possible in this existence, as much as it is in the next. So I'm not saying it's one or the other, I'm saying it's both. It's one and the other. And that's the living hope that Peter refers to here. That people might be once again be upstanding, back on their feet, moving, living with peace and with joy. Now, I don't know you, but I've seen people, and I know people whose lives have been weighted down, whose lives are scarred. People who are unable to break free, where resurrection has been something that's not been either something they've chosen to participate in, or it's not been available to them, in the sense that they just haven't been able to get it. I could tell you story after story of people that I know. It's not that they've rejected a particular set of beliefs, because that's how a lot of Christian people would determine who's someone's deservability of what goes on in their lives. It's not about whether they've rejected a set of beliefs. It's about wearing the burdens and the scars of lives that have been lived without hope. And without someone to live that hope with them. As you know, many of you know, I started out life, in my ministry life, as a youth worker in Redfern. I used to run a drop-in centre for street kids. I can't tell you the number of them that I saw get hooked up into community or into waywardness that saw them on heroin. In my time in Redfern, a few of them died. I watched a kid who was the number 2 in the state for table tennis. He used to beat me every time we played. And I watched him dive. I've seen someone who got a $450,000 payout for an accident on State Rail. They fell out of a train, and it took them about 25 years of fighting for it. And in my time that I knew them, they received a $450,000 payout. And it was gone in 6 months. Drugs, family members who suddenly decided they were entitled to a bit of it. And I saw that person be back on the street within 6 months. I've seen one guy who, he was an interesting character, came from another country, one of the Eastern Bloc countries. Had lost a leg in a building accident here in Sydney. He won lotto. Not once, twice. Won lotto. And when I knew him, he was living on the street. I've seen people whose lives have spiraled. I saw one guy I knew one guy whose life spiraled. He came here with family and got a brain tumour, and his partner left him, and he was living on the street, living in a park in the eastern suburbs. Sometimes life is difficult because we make it difficult. Sometimes life is really hard for people because it unfolds that way through no fault of their own. I want to stand here and say today too that I've seen resurrection. I hope you have too. I know you have. Sometimes we're a little blind to it. Sometimes we miss it. We miss resurrection going on. But I want to tell you a couple of stories of resurrection that I know. I've watched, in my time here, and not in this setting, but I've watched a man who, when I met him, or when we met him, he was self-loathing, angry, violent, depressed. He was a pretty ugly kind of person, to be honest with you. And I've watched him become a leader of men. I've watched him grow compassion. I've watched him grow an interest in others. I've watched him go from be someone whose mouth opened to spill hatred to be someone whose mouth opens to speak words of care and compassion and love and advice and just that friendliness that other men need. I've watched a fellow who came from South Africa, big bloke, white South African, racist, sexist, big, violent, angry, living on the streets. I've watched his life turn around to the point where I've been in a room with him while he's been hugging an Aboriginal woman and referring to him as her sister. There's another fellow I know in my time here who, in the time I've known him, he's gone from being disconnected from family, angry about that, angry with the world, frustrated, difficult to talk to, had housing but wasn't happy with it. And I've seen him, when I say disconnected from family, I mean from an ex-wife and from adult children. And I've watched him come to life. I've seen him find housing that he's comfortable with, that he likes. I've seen him, bit by bit, reconnect with family because his attitude changed a bit. I've seen him reconnect. And I'm not saying, I mean, the question you might ask is, how do these things happen, or how is that resurrection? And I take it to be that resurrection for me is about where people spring to life, where there once was death, life comes. And in my own experience, these things don't happen by accident. In my experience, the stories I'm telling of people who find life are people who find life because a Christian community cares about them. And different to the voice that they hear in most other circles, which is, you're a problem, you're annoying, you're worth less. If only you fixed this up, judgmentalism. Rather than experiencing that, what these people have experienced is a community that says, we see you. We see the scars and we love you. And let's face it, isn't that what all of us want from God? I mean, I find this quite an interesting thing that there are lots of people in the church who not our church, of course, other churches, but who want to run a deservability scale on who should get what and who love should be extended to and who God extends love to. But each and every one of us want God to love us just as we are. And when we choose to live that way as Christian community, it brings living hope to others. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen here. I've seen it happen in other places that I've been. This sense of living hope that now, in this life, there can be resurrection. There can be new life found. Your life can go from being dead in the water to raised up. And it happens because people like you and me can see it for others. And we can gather around people and we can love. So that's kind of the good news I want to share this morning. That's the inspirational news, if you like. That this living hope that we carry for ourselves is not just meant to be something that we put in a treasure box and hold on to for ourselves. This hope is given to us that we might live it out for the benefit of others around us, that others might catch it too. That resurrection happens not just as an afterlife experience. It happens there for sure. But resurrection can happen here and now. Lives can turn around. I do want to make this point. It's a different thing to conversion. And many of us grew up with this sense of running. I got caught up in the whole, going to rallies and trying to get people to come along to make some sort of Christian commitment, right? Have ever anyone been part of that? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying that was often treated as the end goal, to get people's minds computing in the right way so that they took on a particular set of beliefs. What resurrection is something far deeper, far more engaging, far more life-changing, far more long-term goal. The ability to see that this life can hold hope and joy and purpose and meaning and connection. And the best avenue, I'll come back to it again, the best avenue I've ever seen for that is Christian community. Not Christians as individuals running around trying to convert people, but Christian community. The space where people come alive. So my friends, be believing. Live like it's possible. See it, open your eyes to it, and gather around someone when you see a shift going on, when you see a spark of life starting to happen, when you see that living hope starting to take hold. Be part of it. It's part of, as Peter is trying to say, I think, to us, it's part of that salvation being and also being a present and a future thing. There is a salvation that being saved is part of the now. It works for us as well. So that's my word for us today. Resurrection is true. Resurrection happens. Resurrection is living. And the writer of Peter is encouraging us to let that be our hope. In the midst of all the struggles, in the midst of all the hardships, and maybe the person with the hardships and the scars is you. It might not be others that you can see around you. Maybe life is really, really difficult and the scars are there on you. And you wear the difficulties. There is hope. There is hope. And it comes by joining us together in community to live out the faith that we hold, that the way of Jesus makes a difference. That's our living hope. Amen.